Hello everyone and welcome back to another edition of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. My name is Christopher Shepard. Thank you guys for tuning in. Happy Wednesday. We have made it to the middle of the week and there is still a lot of action, especially in fantasy talk, also in betting talk as well. So we're going to do a deep dive into that. Should be a fantastic midweek episode to get us hyped, looking ahead to the weekend as well. We continue with looking at some pundits' rankings, analyzing them at the wide receiver and tight end positions this time. Also, kind of checking in on college football. It doesn't seem like we've had enough time to really look into the college football landscape that much. So we'll update you on the Heisman odds after 2 weeks of college football play. And then we're going to jump the gun a little bit, look ahead to tomorrow night's Thursday night football game between the Buffalo Bills and Miami Dolphins. Should be a good one. But before we get into any of that, I do want to remind you to consider liking, following, and subscribing to the show and the network as a whole. Everything you do for the network, especially me and my fellow podcasters as well, is greatly appreciated. And if you want to be more interactive, be a part almost, if you will, of the show, there are many ways you can do that, so avail yourselves to the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features on YouTube. You can type in a comment in the chat. It will pop up on my screen, and I will read it aloud for everyone to hear, to share your thoughts, share your opinions, because that's what it's all about. I can share my own opinions, but I also want to make sure your opinions are heard as well, because I highly value them. They're what make this show even better. So continue what you guys have been doing these past couple of weeks as we have transitioned to a live show, and we will continue to get better as the weeks go on, as we get deeper and deeper into the fantasy football season. But without further ado, let's jump right into today's episode, starting off with, like I said, continuation of our rankings. We've looked at the QBs and running backs this past episode. Now we're turning our attention to the more skill position kind of players, wide receivers and tight ends. We'll start off in the world of the wide receivers. Again, this is not necessarily my opinion. I will in the future start giving more of my opinion on who I think deserve to be in the top 5, especially in fantasy terms as well. But at the end of the day, this is just a comprehensive list of 5 guys who will be there and thereabouts for the entirety of the season. They'll always be kind of in this core 5. Maybe we'll see some of these guys drop out, but I think this is a comprehensive list after week 1, even if they had some down games in there that a lot of people will respect. And so without further ado, let's look at this list. And we'll start at number 5 with a guy who I kind of told you about how this dynamic between him and his quarterback will continue. He's coming back from injury. Kind of sucks that the way that this came about, where he's now going to get more targets, is because of the injury to Puka Nacua. But Cooper Kupp, man, I told you that dynamic between him and Matthew Stafford is undeniable, and it paid dividends in this game. He will be facing Arizona this weekend, so look for him to get a lot of targets in what should be a rock fight of a divisional contest. But in that game against Detroit, 26 fantasy points, as you see on my screen. He caught, I believe, 7 passes for 110 yards in this game for a total of 26 fantasy points. And in his career against the Cardinals, he's played many games, 6 touchdowns in 12 games, and has 815 yards. So one of his favorite opponents to play against. Look for him, especially now with the absence of Puka Nacua. We do wish him a speedy recovery here. But at the end of the day, the bottom line is, even with Puka Nacua, I still feel that, and forgive me, I apologize, I now remember there was actually 4 targets for 110 yards, so that makes it even better. Maybe not in a PPR sense, but in terms of his stat production and what he does with the ball in his hands. Cooper Kupp certainly pretends to be potentially in the future in these top 5 lists. I think he's kind of a pundit darling. In my humble mind, he is someone who I appreciate in fantasy, but then again, a lot of people believe the Puka Nacua hype, and they have started to kind of let Cooper Kupp fall to the wayside. So what I'm going to say to you is that if you do have Cooper Kupp, appreciate him for all that he does, because we never know what this Rams wide receiver core, or what the Rams in general, as Andre says, Kupp is so back, Thank you for the comments. I believe that as well. It's unfortunate that it came about because of that Puka injury, but I do believe that dynamic between Matthew Stafford and Cooper Kupp, like I said, is undeniable, and it can't be overlooked in terms of fantasy implications. So Cooper Kupp deservedly taking the number 5 spot on this list. And then another guy that I want to talk about who played in this game, as Andre also says, never forget when he put up that legendary 2,200-yard season. Yes, I do appreciate that, but I don't know if you could see in the background, I am a Seattle Seahawks fan, so I have to take everything with a grain of salt, but Cooper Kupp is just a fun receiver to watch. Either way, many great seasons. Hopefully, his best is not in his past, and going off what we saw in that game against Detroit, hopefully he's going to have as big a season as what his stats showed for that game. But let's get into our number 4 receiver, a guy on the opposite end of the spectrum, so to speak, a guy who did not have a great game, and someone who I personally had on my fantasy team, had great expectations for in this first game. I still think he will exceed expectations of what I think of him, and that game was not an indictment of who he was. Amon-Ra St. Brown. He only had 4.3 fantasy points in this game, 3 catches off 6 targets for only 13 yards as well. But I just think that it was a kind of game flow thing. The Lions and Ben Johnson were comfortable running the football in this game. They were comfortable playing smash mouth football and having the passing game be complimentary at best and serviceable at worst. It wasn't necessarily a pretty game for the Lions. They definitely could have won it easier, and Amon-Ra could have had a bigger impact, but still, a win is a win. You can go about many ways winning football games if you're the Detroit Lions. Going back to Amon-Ra St. Brown as a receiver, though. Like I said, I still believe in him. I still believe that his first-team All-Pro season career high stands the test of time. And in this offense, yes, there are a lot of mouths to feed. There's a lot of ways you can distribute the wealth in this offense, and Ben Johnson is still kind of figuring it out. But at the end of the day, Amon-Ra St. Brown still is the wide receiver 1. He's still, if the Lions are focused on a game plan that opens up the field more and gets more involved in the passing game, then Amon-Ra St. Brown will always be the first to look. He'll always be the first option. And Jared Goff knows that. Kudos to Andre here for all these comments flooding in. I believe still, but I think if the Lions notice somebody can't stop the run, they'll continue to do what they did against the Rams. That O-line is so elite. That's another big factor. Thank you for that comment. That is a fantastic point from you, Andre. That O-line really is built to sustain whatever game plan Ben Johnson lays out. Because we saw, like Andre alluded to in this game, the power of that running game. They rode David Montgomery, and it paid dividends in the end. And this game against the Bucs could be very similar because the Bucs are a team that really is transitioning into a top 10 defense in my mind. I think that they can reach that echelon. I think the Bucs are underrated defense, and they have a very stout front seven. That secondary, yes, is very scary. They have Antoine Winfield Jr. in that secondary. They have so many different pieces. But at the end of the day, you might want to consider doing what you did against the Rams, because David Montgomery will ease kind of the pass rush. And also, that could open up many more avenues for Jared Goff underneath. And Amon-Ra St. Brown, what I love about him is he's very fascinating to watch when he works underneath. He's not someone who just always goes vertical. He knows how to run routes. He's very intelligent in that aspect, in that regard. And so still look for him. This game, like I said, was not a true embodiment of who Amon-Ra St. Brown is, and I expect him to bounce back, have a very similar season to what he'd had last year, and he will deserve the plaudits that will carry over to this year from last year. But going on to number 3, this is a guy who I also expect to get more comfortable as the season goes on. Didn't necessarily have a terrible game, but it wasn't, quote-unquote, impressive for this guy, and that is CeeDee Lamb. Now, the flow of this game for both teams, more so specifically for Dallas, was weird in the sense that, yes, I liked what I saw out of their offense, but it wasn't necessarily the prettiest way to go about it, if you know what I mean. I still think that this Dallas offense is getting underrated, but at the end of the day, this kind of settles down this whole offense. The fact that they went into Cleveland against that good defense and were able to get that win, and convincingly as well, will settle things down. Now that both Dak and CD are tied down, that connection will remain very integral to the success of this offense. But looking at CeeDee Lamb's stats, like I said, 5 catches, 10 targets, 61 yards, 13.6 fantasy points. So, like I said, not impressive, but still kind of serviceable enough to the point where you know he will improve. And this weekend against the Saints, I think CeeDee Lamb will see a lot of. The Saints, kind of a team in transition in the secondary as well. So look out for CeeDee Lamb to be someone to really elevate his game. This Cowboys offense could just be getting started, really. I'm really excited to see now that the tension has dissipated with the offense. They still have the tension looming concerning Micah Parsons, but I think that right now, this is who is going to be the X factor for this offense. CeeDee Lamb deserves to be number 3 on this list. Coming on at number 2, another guy who didn't have a quote-unquote impressive game for where he's seen in this league, but still, he's going to be one of those, I'll call him an I'll-be-there receiver. He's always there to bail out someone who is learning in this offense. That is Justin Jefferson combined with Sam Darnold. I love what Justin Jefferson purportedly is the word, told Sam Darnold during training camp. He said, I'll always be there for you. Look for me to get open. And this game was not his prettiest game by any means, but it does show what Justin Jefferson is. He's a security blanket. He's a number 1 receiver as well. 4 catches, 6 targets, 59 yards, 1 TD, 15.9 fantasy points. Again, pretty pedestrian for someone who has such lofty standards of himself, and I think that's kind of because of what this team could be, but it's also kind of a diagnosis of where this team is. Sam Darnold was willing to explore his options in this game. He wasn't necessarily focused on getting Justin Jefferson the ball. He was focused on getting everyone involved. And that's what I loved about what I saw from the Minnesota Vikings. Justin Jefferson will get his, but Sam Darnold, I would really appreciate it that he knew that he could explore different options, and if nothing was there, Justin Jefferson would make himself available. And so that's what I love about Justin Jefferson. He may not have pretty fantasy stat lines, but he's always going to be someone who can be relied upon, both in real life and fantasy, to get the necessary production you need. He's very efficient in that regard. But I think the number 1 receiver, you all know, Tyreek Hill. And this proved that no matter what events transpired that day, no one could truly contain a player like Tyreek Hill. Yes, the first half was kind of disappointing, kind of quiet. As Shep Easy's sweet spot says, without Addison, JJ will get more defensive attention. Yes, fantastic point. I completely forgot about the Addison injury. So yes, Jettis will get a lot of attention from defenses, but at the end of the day, I'm not necessarily worried about it for the overall profile of the Minnesota Vikings or for what Justin Jefferson brings to the table. You'll always find ways to make himself available. And if he has to shorten some of his routes, if he's, covered to the point where he can't get vertical, then that's fine. Sam Darnold will find him, and it won't necessarily hurt or hinder the Minnesota Vikings offense. But that's a fascinating point to kind of dissect because, Justin Jefferson does still require, even with different pieces around him that are, when they're healthy, can provide offense like Addison, like Hawkinson. But at the end of the day, Justin Jefferson will find a way. But let's get back to Tyreek Hill because no one can truly contain this man. Yes, the first half was not pretty for him or the Dolphins offense as a whole, but in the second half, one play can change everything, and that 80-yard bomb really settled him down. And I think in this game against Buffalo, he's about to go off because the questions about the Buffalo secondary are really up in the air. So many injuries coming off that game against Arizona. So look for Tyreek Hill to wreak havoc in this one. Although he only has 366 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns in 7 career games against the Bills, this game certainly feels like he'll have a big say in that and that will come in the future when we talk about some prop bets. But let me know what you guys think in the comments about this list. Again, not necessarily mine, but I just wanted to show you a comprehensive, well thought out list and analyze it myself in terms of who the top 5 really are. And these guys truly deserve to be on this list, in my opinion. But right after this quick break, we'll be going over the tight end rankings and which tight ends really impressed pundits and my overall analysis concerning their findings. We'll be right back after this short break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign.